Hey booktube friends, I hope everyone's having a great week. I wanted to talk about the 3 books that I read this week, and believe it or not, I'm not going to talk about Russia at all this week. I know I was kind of on a Russia kick, and I did actually get a Russian anthology of poetry, which I will probably get into here shortly, but not this week. So the first book that I read was A Study in Charlotte by Brittany Cavallaro. We follow the descendants of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson as they attend a boarding school in Connecticut. At this school, there are a series of copycat crimes with the intent to frame Jamie Watson and Charlotte Holmes. It was very interesting that Holmes was a teenage girl in this book. I really liked that aspect of the book. I thought it was very witty, it was very fun, it was not very long. Pretty solid mystery. The character of Charlotte Holmes does follow a lot of Sherlock Holmes's characteristics, including his issues with drug abuse, which some people were kind of turned off about, but I thought that was an interesting element to the story because it does introduce people to the Sherlock Holmes stories and to this dynamic between Holmes and Watson. You know, Holmes being this brilliant but erratic personality, and Watson being kind of the steadying character or friend in that duo. So I did enjoy it. I probably won't continue the series. It's not something that I just absolutely loved, and I'm not a huge series person, so it takes a lot for me to really invest in a series. But I did enjoy it, and if you are a fan of Sherlock Holmes and you are not opposed to reading young adult books, maybe you'll check it out. The second book that I listened to this week was called The Residence Inside the Private World of the White House by Kate Andersen Brower, and this follows the White House resident staff from the Kennedy presidency all the way to President Obama's terms in office, and it really portrayed the presidents and their families as genuine people. 2 people that were probably portrayed in the worst light in this book were Nancy Reagan and President Johnson. And you know, the President Johnson thing was not a huge surprise for me, knowing what I know about how crass and kind of vulgar he could be. It really wasn't a shock that, you know, he was not portrayed in a very positive light and was not very nice to most of the White House staff. And apparently it takes the Department of Defense, the National Park Service, and a team of very patient, dedicated White House staff to create a shower that is good enough to get Lyndon Johnson clean. So if you know anything about Lyndon Johnson, then you may know he had a special shower installed at his private home, and so when he got to the White House, he was always complaining about the water pressure. Essentially, he wanted it to be like a fire hose, and it's absolutely crazy, but doesn't surprise me. 2 people that were kind of the most beloved by the White House staff were John F. Kennedy and then also George Herbert Walker Bush. There are a lot of really just sweet stories about George and Barbara Bush and how they treated the staff and that sort of thing. And so it was really neat to hear the inside story from the resident staff. And let me say, this is really not a tell-all. I wouldn't really consider it a tell-all or kind of a controversial expose or anything like that, because the White House staff, from all accounts, appears to be extremely professional and discreet, and they take their job very seriously. And they're probably one of the few groups in Washington that put their service to the country and to the First Family over their own personal and political beliefs. So they're definitely a group of people who should be admired. I have a lot of respect for what they do and what they have to give up in order to render this service to the country. The one negative about this book is that it kind of jumped around a little bit. It didn't really go through chronologically, and it was sort of topical, but not really. So that part made it a little bit hard to follow. I would have preferred if it went from, one presidency to the next. Obviously, I was very interested in all of the Kennedy stories, so that would have been nice to have them all there together. But there was a lot of really neat insight into the Kennedy presidency and the aftermath of his assassination. There was also some insight into the circumstances post 9/11 when that terrorist attack was unfolding. The White House staff was really unprepared, and the Secret Service really wasn't too concerned with the White House staff at that point, and so it was very chaotic, it was very uncertain, and it was very interesting and scary to hear some of the White House staff's accounts of that day, because essentially they were told to get out of the White House, some were told to go north, some were told to go south. There was a lot of confusion, and some White House staff actually had to stay at the White House to continue performing their duties because they needed to clear the area for the president's arrival. So, very interesting book. It was one that I listened to while I was running, so it definitely kept my interest. I would say it was respectfully done. There are definitely some inside stories here, and you get an inside look at the real people behind the presidency. And I would also say I think it tells you a lot about people when you see how they treat service staff. So that's always interesting to see. The last book that I read this week was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, and I don't think I've ever read this book, but I have seen one of the film adaptations. I believe that was produced under the title 10 Little Indians, and luckily it's been so long since I've seen the film, I kind of forgot what happened. But essentially the premise of this book is that 10 people are invited to this remote private island off the coast of England, and one by one these people are murdered under very creepy circumstances, and essentially the murders are following the format of this poem, this children's nursery rhyme, essentially about 10 little Indians. I will say this book was very atmospheric. You're on an island. It gets very nautical. There are some storms. There's a little bit of a paranormal element to one of the storylines, and it's a very interesting premise because essentially what's happening is the people who were invited to this island, they have murdered someone. Not necessarily murdered them outright. Maybe they have murdered someone surreptitiously or through something they've said or through inaction, but their actions or words have brought about the deaths of people. And so there's this idea of justice and how justice is being served. And so there's a psychological aspect to this book. The atmosphere of this book is very creepy, very haunting, and Agatha Christie is always easy to read, but her mysteries are very clever. So I will say that if you're into mysteries, this is a must read. I'm probably way behind the curve on this one. Like I said, I don't think I've ever read it, but I had seen the film, and luckily I forgot it. I would most certainly recommend this one. I'm sure most of you out there have read this book already. So if you have any thoughts on it, please let me know. I hope everyone is having a great weekend, and I will see you in the next video.